Thank you very much for that introduction, and to EDAS for giving me the opportunity to address you this afternoon in these inspirational surroundings, which I mean, every time I come here, I find it more amazing, sort of the decor of this place. It's like kind of Presbyterianism meets play school. My main regret, actually, is I'm not allowed to address you from the pulpit. So I don't know why have a pulpit if you can't bully people from it? I suppose, I mean, Robin, is Robin still here? I don't think he is. Robin McAlpine? No, he's not really. But I think Robin should really have been addressing us from the pulpit because, I mean, there you hear the true voice of Scottish Presbyterian egalitarianism, echoing down the centuries. You can imagine Robin in the 17th century addressing, countryside conventicles, during the killing time. It's really inspirational stuff. It's great. And I think he's made a huge contribution to this whole debate, as has EDAS by organizing something about this vexatious question of Scotland's constitutional future, which has managed to be intelligent and non-sectarian, not something that's really been characterizing the constitutional debate over the past couple of weeks, which is more like cyber zombies versus Death Eaters. It's not so much Harry Potter as Game of Thrones. Do people here watch Game of Thrones? Everybody see a Game of Thrones? I don't know. I mean, my kids watch it. That's my excuse. But it's actually replete with all sorts of north-south metaphors appropriate to Scotland. For a start, the Westeros, which is the divided state in question, looks rather like the British Isles, in fact. And Scotland at the top is marked off by an ice wall, which seems kind of curiously appropriate. And you could just see George Osborne as Tywin Lannister, couldn't you? Absolutely perfect. And Alex Salmond as Mance Rayder. Well, Nicola Sturgeon, now that you have to draw a veil over that, because anyone who's watched this program knows only too well, as soon as women appear on it, they seem to somehow lose their clothes. Don't know how that happens, really. Anyway, winter is coming, as that's the theme of Game of Thrones. That's their kind of mission statement, which could really be Scotland's mission statement, couldn't it? I mean, it reminds me of my grandmother. On a day like this, she would always say, yeah, it's nice weather, but we'll pay for it. We'll pay for it. I think that's, such a clear expression of kind of Scotland's negative self-image, the kind of thing that hopefully is being banished in this debate, because I think on the whole it has been pretty positive, and even from the no side, though they have relied rather too much, I think, on scare stories and threats. I mean, there's been positive interventions, I suppose you could put it, from, well, the Pope, J.K. Rowling, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, Dolly Parton. Actually, I made that one up, but she is speaking. She is singing tonight in Glasgow, and no doubt she will refer to it in some way. Actually, my paper today was saying that, was warning, its latest warning is that China doesn't like the idea of Scottish independence, which is another one, really. I mean, taking guidance from a communist dictatorship about Scotland's constitutional future seems pretty rich. I mean, look how they've treated Tibet. But then we'll draw a veil over that because we don't want to cause any problems about international relations. So anyway, what I'm talking about here, if I get around to it, if I actually find my notes, is, well, that Scotland faces an array of economic and social problems. We know what they are: outmigration, aging population, all sorts of demographic issues, lingering social deprivation, lagging longevity, and endemic low pay and low productivity. The low productivity, I think, has been slightly overstressed at this conference because Scotland's productivity, actually, if you look at it, is not that different from the rest of the UK, and that's actually what Mark Carney said in his famous speech in this city in January. He said that Scotland and England did actually constitute, in many ways, an optimal currency zone appropriate for a single currency, and he said that was because that on lots of economic indicators, GDP per head, productivity, even business cycle, language, trading relations, Scotland and England do constitute some kind of optimal monetary zone. His warning, of course, was that if that is to continue, there would have to be a ceding of sovereignty north and south, which I think he was surprised to discover that the Scottish government really took on the chin, and that's probably what I'm wanting to talk about just now, is the way in which there has been quite a convergence of opinion. I mean, I have to get something off my chest here now, which is this, that I actually agree with Gordon. I agree with Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, when he says that the optimal future for the British Isles and for Scotland's place in it would be a new federal constitution, that the old centralist sovereign United Kingdom is past its sell-by date, that it needs to be reconstituted as a multinational state of free nations under a new written constitution. I mean, it's what some people, well, I in my book actually wrote a referendum called Independence in the UK, which was a phrase that was originally coined by none other than Donald Dewar in the 1980s. And I mean, I know it's a contradiction in terms, it's an oxymoron to say independence in the UK because they're antithetical, but that's often what constitutions are about. Look at the European Union, which is a union, sovereign union, if you like, of sovereign states who pool sovereignty for specific purposes. And I think he's right that that is probably the optimal solution for the UK. I mean, geography is destiny, and Scotland is locked on to this, to England and this very small island. We're not going to escape. We're not going to disappear with an ice wall like in Westeros. Scotland and England is going to have to cooperate on a whole range of issues, from marine conservation to broadcasting, monetary union to immigration, renewable energy to subsidies, to defence. And these are going to have to be organised at a UK level, whatever happens, whether Scotland is independent or in the UK. And day one after independence is declared, if it is declared in 2016, there will have to be an array of multinational bodies set up to reconcile that. Now, so Gordon Brown is quite right, I believe, about federalism. It's a great project, and it would be ideal for the United Kingdom, given our history, our language, and our geography. However, there's one problem. It's just not going to happen. There's absolutely no way that Westminster is going to go through the trauma and the expense and the intellectual effort of reshaping the United Kingdom as a federal state with separation of powers, with an English Parliament, with fiscal disaggregation, with an array of regional parliaments and states, all with their own differing economic arrangements, much as Ben Thompson was showing, as is the case in the United States. That was a very interesting slide he showed there. It was impossible to read it, of course, but it was very interesting to see the diversity of economic arrangements that apply in the states of the United States of America. But the United States of Britain just isn't. It really isn't on the cards. And I don't see any, I don't know, I understand how Gordon can really believe that it is. I mean, his own party has just put up its own proposals again this week with the other parties on Calton Hill. Unfortunately, with an unintentional irony, it was on this unfinished monument, which is generally called Edinburgh's disgrace, or Scotland's disgrace, on Calton Hill. What they were proposing was, well, 5% varying, another 5% variation in income tax. I mean, that is not federalism. It's not remotely connected with federalism. Johann Lamont has absolutely no intention of promoting federalism in the UK, and Ed Miliband would quail at the very prospect of it. The Scottish Liberal Democrats, who were also on the Hill there with their guarantees of more powers, were, well, the Liberal Democrats have been, or the Liberals, as they used to be before 1988, the Liberals have been arguing for federalism for, for over 100 years, and they've never got anywhere near implementing it. And their best opportunity arguably came in 2010 when they formed a coalition with the Conservatives after the 2010 general election. But federalism was not even raised by Nick Clegg and David Cameron in the Downing Street Rose Garden. It was not on the agenda, remotely on the agenda. And the Tories and the Scottish Conservatives, who are joining with Labour and the Lib Dems on Edinburgh's disgrace, they have made enormous strides as the Conservatives, given that they've gone from a line in the sand 2 years ago to all income tax being devolved, or most income tax powers being devolved, because, of course, under their scheme, the Strathclyde Commission report, they don't include tax thresholds, and they don't include lots and lots of other taxes as well, excise duty, corporation tax, soil revenues. These are all off the agenda. So that is a giant leap for the Scottish Conservatives, but it's a baby step as far as federalism or fiscal autonomy is concerned. It doesn't really measure up to that at all. So, you know, in fact, the only concrete proposal, very few people seem to notice this, but the only concrete constitutional proposal in the Strathclyde Commission report was for implementing the Mackay proposals, the Mackay report of 2012, which called for the removal of Scotland's voting rights on nominally English affairs in Westminster. I think that gives you more of an indication in where the thinking is going as far as that is concerned, as far as constitutional reform is concerned. So, you know, this is not something which is a practical political significance. If Scotland is going to form a federation with the rest of the United Kingdom, it's going to have to do it on its own. It's going to have to, some way, as Henry McLeish was really suggesting, I think, in his very illuminating and interesting remarks this morning, Scotland is going to have to some way find itself out of the United Kingdom before it can get back into it under different terms, in different federal terms. Now, Henry's not saying he's going to vote yes, but clearly he's conflicted, and he's certainly not minded to vote no in the referendum. But anyway, so, you know, as I say, these are problems which Scotland is going to face, whether or not we are in or out of the United Kingdom. And I mean, I am increasingly attracted to the idea of Scotland making a decisive declaration of sovereignty. A declaration of sovereignty which is what Gordon Brown said was necessary, but a real declaration of sovereignty which does actually assert Scotland's independence, thereafter to be able to unite with the rest of the United Kingdom in a different and reconstituted United Kingdom. It seems to me the only way that that's really going to happen. But there are, of course, ahead of that, there are lots and lots of obstacles. There are the unintended consequences and the intended consequences of asserting independence, of voting yes. And these have been endlessly recycled and examined in the press over the past 2 years, 2.5 years, or however long this referendum campaign has been going on. It's the longest political campaign in Scottish history, without doubt. The two of the most important ones are Europe and the pound. Now, and people say, well, look, what's the point of, you may have this idea that we could reconstitute the United Kingdom, but what about the casualties of independence? What about the difficulties that would arise in the process of disengagement from the existing UK, whether or not you could come back into a different form or not? And obviously, Europe is high on that list. In fact, there have really been two main issues in this referendum, in Europe and the pound. And I think they have been essentially bogus issues. I mean, Europe, for example, as we heard from Fabian, very eloquently, I believe, explaining the reality of Europe as opposed to the fiction, which is that it's inconceivable that Scotland would be refused entry to the European Union. Inconceivable that Scotland, which has been subject to European Union law since 1993 and has been subject to EEC law for nearly 40 years, the idea that Scotland, a democracy, a prosperous democracy, would not be allowed entry into the European Union when they've just allowed in Bulgaria and Romania, which have all sorts of problems in terms of treatment of minorities and human rights. The idea is just not credible. I mean, there may be negotiations. Obviously, Europe is all about negotiations, and people might have different views of how Scotland should relate to the common currency. But the idea, which is very current, if you speak to people, and opinion polls have indicated this, if you speak to a lot of Scottish voters, they seriously believe that Scotland will be ejected in some way from the European Union, a proposition that is simply absurd. Similarly, the pound. Now, the pound is the other key issue in the referendum campaign, as we all know. We had the declaration on the pound in February 2014 when George Osborne came up on a day trip and then disappeared after saying that if Scotland walks away from the UK, walks away from the pound. Now, again, this is one other of these issues which kind of exists in the political sphere and in the journalistic sphere, but as soon as you go beyond that, as soon as you speak to serious politicians or civil servants or economists or even academics, they say, yeah, of course, this is really for political consumption. Of course, there would be some form of arrangement would happen after independence if Scotland declared itself to be independent. The idea that in some way a financial Hadrian's Wall will be set up to prevent Scotland using the pound is patently ludicrous. Even if anyone proposed it, which would be hugely economically damaging, not least for England because of the implications for trade, it would not be possible to make it work because sterling is a convertible currency. Anyone can use it if they wish. After Ireland used the pound, it issued its own Irish pound in a one-to-one parity with the UK pound, and that continued for 50 years after Ireland became independent until they joined the European Union and joined the euro. And throughout that entire period, even when Ireland was regarded as an alien country, a foreign country, even an enemy country because of its attitude to the First and Second World Wars, pounds freely circulated throughout Ireland. Now, so, that's another of these issues which, I think has brought some, well, I think it reflects very badly on the Unionists, because unionism, as Gordon Brown has indicated, is a very plausible and has many, many positive arguments can be made for it, trying to suggest that in some way, as a result of Scotland exercising its democratic rights to self-determination, that England in some way would exert this kind of retribution and try to wreck the Scottish economy is ridiculous. And there's a succession of other issues. I mean, we don't have time to go into all of them now. Now, I'm not quite sure when I started, so you're going to have to give me an indication of when I have to stop. Do you know where we are? 5 minutes. Oh, really? Already? Fine, okay. So let's go through the finance of the Scottish Parliament. This is seen as a great financial problem, but actually the problems remaining in the United Kingdom will be almost as demanding as those leaving it. In fact, I'd argue they'd be more so. And people say about the anxiety south of the border at Scotland, the resentment at Scotland's exceptionalism. What people are generally talking about there is, well, the West Lothian question on the one hand, but also the Barnett formula, because there is a feeling south of the border that Scotland gets more than its fair share of public spending. Now, if Scotland stays in Union, we know there's going to be a lot of changes, detailed changes, awkward changes being made to fiscal arrangements. But what no one has mentioned in any of these schemes from the Liberal Democrats or from Labour or from the Conservatives is what happens to the Barnett formula, because obviously that is going to have to be reformed. And that's going to be a very traumatic and difficult period. In some ways, it is a simpler proposal, a simpler fiscal project for Scotland to have fiscal autonomy, to effectively be independent as far as its economic management is concerned, while nevertheless continuing to fund certain common services like defence, foreign affairs, and currency management at the centre. There's a flight of capital and business that we're told will happen after independence. Again, I just don't see this as being a credible threat. If Royal Bank of Scotland wishes to get up and leave, I think a lot of people would say, well, fare thee well. I don't think people feel that Scotland's domination by the banks is actually a very positive thing. And anyway, if you look at it, Royal Bank of Scotland is already a City of London institution. And under the kind of regulations that would apply after independence, the European Union would regard it and insist that it was defined as a City of London institution. Why? Because nearly all, 90% of its business and its activities take place in the City of London, where it's known as the National Westminster, amongst other things. So I just don't think it's plausible. Standard Life says it would get up and leave. Well, I'm not so sure about that. I don't see any indication that it would seriously want to depart from Scotland, where it employs 5,000 people and where it's been for many years. Sainsbury's seriously, are we to suppose that supermarkets are not going to continue in Scotland after independence? Of course not. It's a ridiculous proposition. I mean, in fact, as many people will argue, if you have an independent Scotland, you almost certainly have, at least in the early stages, a modest economic boomlet, which is partly a result of the many international companies feeling they have to locate in Scotland. They have to have a presence in Scotland as an independent country. This will apply particularly to people involved in the oil industry, which makes rather a nonsense of Bob Woodward's claim, the BP chairman, that in some way BP would leave Scotland if it became independent. But actually, in many ways, it's not really the powers that determine these things. Scottish Parliament already has powers to promote industry. Corporation tax is not going to make a huge difference. National insurance contributions could be cut. That might make a marginal difference as well. But these aren't the key economic questions in my view. And I think that's why Robin is right to look at it much more as a moral question. I mean, just being there is a huge part of economic and industrial development. Just think of Grangemouth. Now, last year we nearly lost Grangemouth, the petrochemical refinery there, which accounts for something like 10% of Scottish industrial GDP. And it was a head-banging confrontation between a headstrong boss of INEOS and a rather headstrong trade union which had their own local issues which they were trying to promote. But be in no doubt, we could have lost Grangemouth if it hadn't been for the fact that the Scottish government and Alex Salmond personally was in there knocking heads together. That could have gone down. And that's an indication, I think, of why independence can actually make a very significant difference, even apart from the specific powers of the Scottish Parliament. I mean, and you can see that from Norway. I've just come back from Norway. It's become a bit of a cliche to go on about how Norway has managed its oil wealth so effectively, creating its oil fund of $700 billion worth. It owns 2% of all the world's shares, all the world's equities. It's an extraordinary achievement that they've managed to quarantine the oil wealth and not allow it to destroy the rest of the economy, because, of course, oil and gas are often described as the resource curse because of the kind of effects they can have. Now, how Norway was insulated from those kinds of problems was its moral community. It has a very communitarian outlook. It has strong social protections. It has a commitment to co-determination in industry. They still have collective bargaining there in Norway. It has integrated, its economy has very well-financed and effective public services, which people in Norway have a very different attitude towards. In Norway, people don't feel that the government takes the money out of their pockets because they can see how it's being used, and they feel that their money is being used very well, and it is being used very well. It's an extraordinary model for Scotland. Look at what's happened during the worst economic crisis in 80 years. Norway, Denmark, these countries were largely insulated from the effects of the banking crisis. Norway sailed through it it has full employment, 3.2%. It has growth of 3.5%. It has a Gini coefficient of 25%, so it's one of the most equalitarian societies in the world. It also happens to be one of the richest countries in the world, and regularly appears on the World Bank list of countries, the best countries in the world to set up a business. And that's the other thing we fail to appreciate in this country, which is that communitarian policies, social democratic policies need not be antithetical to entrepreneurial dynamism, and that's very noticeable, particularly in Denmark, which of course doesn't have the prodigious oil wealth that Norway possesses or Scotland possesses, but still manages to be one of the most successful economic countries in the world. Now, look, I just want to finish on that because hopefully, if you want, we can have some questions about this. And this question we're all going to have to address in the next few weeks. It's not far off now. I think the debate about independence has been a very positive one. Whatever happens as a result of the referendum, whether it's in or out, I think the debate has been very constructive on the whole, despite what I've been saying about the rather negative approach of the No campaign. I think it has alerted Scotland, not just to Scotland's problems, which we all knew about in the past, but curiously has alerted many people who were unaware of it to Scotland's great advantages. Because Scotland is a hugely successful country. Despite all the manifold problems which we've itemized and have been discussed today, it is still an extremely successful society, even without oil. The Financial Times and Standard & Poor's said it would receive its highest economic assessment. The OECD places Scotland 14th in terms of GDP in the world. It has a financial services industry employing over 100,000 people. The food and drink industry is worth $8 billion. Its tourism is worth even more. Scotland has prodigious intellectual capital. Again, few people seem to fully appreciate this. We have 5 world-class universities in Scotland, a country of only 5 million. And that's more than Germany and more than France in terms of world-class. That's universities who figure in the top 200 in the world. I mean, I know this personally because I was rector of Edinburgh University for 3 years, and I saw exactly what was being produced by that intellectual powerhouse. And it is quite extraordinary to see what's going on there. but deeply depressing to see that the products of Scotland's intellectual capital do not get exploited. I hate using the word exploited, but unfortunately that is the one we are landed with, are not exploited in Scotland. All the world-class research, the thousands of graduates, all the patents that are developed in Edinburgh University, they go abroad. There's no way of these being developed or progressed in Scotland because, for a start, there we have this problem of professional out-migration. These graduates have no jobs here, so they all go south. There's no capital here, so we have such a poor rate of new business startups. It's tremendously difficult to start a business in Scotland. It's supremely difficult. Banks won't lend to you. You're miles away from the other people in your sector. There's this sense in Scotland, there's lack of confidence and lack of sense of reality of what Scotland is capable of being. I mean, this is, and you know, we know what the problem facing Scotland is. It's the same problem that faces the north of England. You know, it's a hugely creative and productive society which is continually frustrated by its remoteness and its absence from the decision-making centres of the United Kingdom. 71% of Scots know this, which is why they've told opinion polls this week they want federalism. I can't see federalism happening under the present Westminster arrangement. I don't see the Westminster establishment being remotely interested in it. Perhaps you can see it happening, I don't know, in which case I think you know what to do in September. But for me, I'm afraid there's only one answer to this opportunity which has been presented, unique opportunity, which won't happen again, at least not in this generation. Unique opportunity presented to Scotland in September the 18th, and for my money, it isn't to say no thanks. Thanks.